Approximately 350,000 pioneers traveled the almost 2,000-mile journey from Missouri to Oregon along the Oregon Trail between the years 1846 and 1869. The 6-month journey west was not easy. The Oregon Trail migration was an important point in American history because it helped the United States expand from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Pioneers were motivated to travel the Oregon Trail because of the tough economic times in the East and the promise of free farmland in the West. The pioneers faced many challenges along the Oregon Trail, including starvation, accidents, and disease. If evenly spaced along the length of the Oregon Trail, there would be a grave every 50 yards, from Missouri to Oregon City. Every 1 in 10 people died while on the Oregon Trail. During the Great Migration, the pioneers encountered life-threatening diseases and severe accidents that challenged their medical knowledge and forced them to explore new remedies. Marcus Whitman led the first party of wagons along the Oregon Trail in 1843. He established it as a viable route for thousands of pioneers to use. Marcus Whitman was a doctor and missionary during the 1830s and 40s. When Whitman was 21, he studied to become a doctor as an apprentice under an experienced physician. He received a medical doctorate degree from Fairfield Medical College. Doctors in the 1830s weren't required to complete as much schooling as doctors today. One doctor asserted, "The boy to go into medicine was a son too weak or too lazy for farm work, too stupid for the bar, and too immoral for pulpit." Whitman served as a missionary doctor in 1835 to the Nez Perce and the Flathead Native American tribes. In 1843, Marcus Whitman, along with his wife Narcissa, led the first migration of wagon trains along the Oregon Trail to their mission in the Cayuse settlement. Whitman provided medical care to both the Native Americans and settlers. Indians are amazed at the overwhelming numbers of Americans coming into this country. They seem not to know what to make of it, Narcissa, Whitman's wife, observed. In 1847, an epidemic of measles struck the pioneers at the Whitman settlement, killing most of the children. The outbreak spread to a nearby Cayuse tribe, and they blamed the spread of the virus on the pioneers. Native Americans at the time believed that, keeping in harmony with themselves and those around them, their natural environment, and their Creator, would keep away illness and harm. The Cayuse did not know that measles was an airborne virus. Several Cayuse tribe members took revenge for what they perceived as betrayal and killed 14 pioneers, including the Whitman family. Measles wasn't the only disease that struck the pioneers. There was a cholera epidemic in the United States in the late 1840s. Some pioneers hoped to escape the epidemic by traveling west. They weren't so lucky. Cholera was the leading cause of death on the Oregon Trail. For safety reasons, the pioneers tried to remain close to the wagons when stopped on breaks. The makeshift bathrooms weren't always far enough away from the water source, and it could easily become contaminated. They did not know how many diseases that they were contracting were actually coming from the drinking water. The effort to keep someone with cholera hydrated could potentially make them sicker. Most pioneers died within 12 hours of the first signs of cholera. Unaware of what was causing the symptoms, laudanum, a painkiller, was given to the pioneers who had become infected. Space was limited in the wagons the pioneers used, and even though it was recommended, a medicine kit was not their first priority when packing. Medicine kits often included citric acid for fighting scurvy, quinine for malaria, and laudanum for treating cholera symptoms and other medicines for various illnesses. If none of these remedies worked, opium and whiskey were also an option. Even though the pioneers had all of these medicines for the different diseases, none of the medicines did anything to fight the symptoms of cholera. Sometimes the medicine caused death sooner than the disease itself. The pioneers had very little medical knowledge, and many believed that more medicine the person received, the faster they would heal. We now know this is not true. There are several accounts in pioneers' journals of people dying due to overdoses. Lucy Deedy recalls the bottle of laudanum hanging from the nail inside the wagon, and her little sister, Salida, drank the entire bottle. Salida complained that she was sleepy. She then laid down on some bedding and was dead before the family knew what was happening. The virus that was the leading cause of death in children on the Oregon Trail was diphtheria. Diphtheria is a serious infection in the nose and throat. It is most commonly spread through person-to-person contact or contact with items that have the bacteria on them. There was no medicine that brought relief for the symptoms of diphtheria while on the Oregon Trail, so pioneers would inhale the steam from boiled pine tar. There has been medical advances in curing diphtheria since the 1800s. Now, there is rarely a case of diphtheria in America. Major diseases like diphtheria and cholera presented a threat to the pioneers' lives. Less talked about, but still life-threatening, were the common colds and fevers. To treat a fever on the Oregon Trail, you must wet the scalp and all painful parts every 2 to 3 hours or until the pain abates. A sickness that is still common today is called mountain sickness. Mountain sickness is a form of altitude sickness. While there was no real cure for the sickness, the pioneers still tried to ease all of the symptoms by treating them individually. Even though viruses and diseases were the main cause of death on the Oregon Trail, they weren't the only medical challenges the pioneers faced. Gunshot wounds and people being run over by wagon wheels were common accidents as well. There were very few doctors in the 1800s, let alone on the Oregon Trail. If the pioneers were lucky, their wagon train included a doctor. The doctor carried a sort of surgery kit with them. The kit included basic supplies, an assortment of scissors, needle, claws, and knives. The doctor would treat a gunshot wound by sticking their bare hand into the victim's body and feeling around for the bullet. Once the doctor felt the bullet, he would try to remove it. Not only was this very painful, but the injured victim would get sick from the doctor's dirty hands reaching inside their body. The doctors did not worry about cleaning their hands or their tools before and after the procedures they performed. Very little was known about bacteria at this time. The contact with unclean hands and dirty medical tools made the people even sicker than before the doctor treated them. A small child was vulnerable to all sorts of accidents, from rattlesnake bites to campfire burns. Accidents in and around the wagon were common as well. A pioneer reported that a 5-year-old Frank Gravel barely escaped with his life when a wagon rolled over him. The Native American women shared their knowledge about herbs and remedies with the pioneers. This information had been passed down through generations. The pioneer women learned to use wild plants as medicine from the Native Americans. Both the Native Americans and the pioneers used the prickly pear for food and medicine, along with using herbs and roots for medicine. The Native Americans also relied on prayers and chants for their healing ceremonies. Some of the Native American remedies adopted by the pioneers included willow bark tea to help nausea, sweating and restricted diet to help reduce fevers, and wild mint for abdominal pain. While these natural remedies are not as popular in today's society, they are widely used ingredients in other medicinal products. In one of her diary entries, Jane Gould said, "It seems so sad to think of being buried and left alone in so wild a country, with no one to plant a flower or shed a tear over one's grave." The pioneers mainly traveled on the trail during the summer and fall months. The rest of the year, the trail was barren and lonely. Pioneers set off on their journey west with very little medical knowledge and only basic medical supplies. The pioneers encountered life-threatening diseases and severe accidents. Doctors were few and far between on the Oregon Trail, and women often had to treat the sick and injured. Yet during the Great Migration, the Euro-Americans were willing to risk their lives for promise of a better life. They unknowingly became pioneers in the world of medicine as well. Along the Oregon Trail, they explored new treatments, exchanged information with Native Americans, and applied newfound knowledge to survive.